Just how ugly is Myles Garrett willing to make his trade request? I'll tell you how far I think he'll go next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. How ugly will Myles Garrett make his trade request to get out of Cleveland? Browns made their first moves of the offseason, speaking of getting out of Cleveland, and two potential Browns draft targets won't be doing on-the-field workouts at the Combine, and that's okay. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast and for making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you will find Cleveland Browns content with the Locked On Browns every Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well. And it's totally free to you. All you have to do is subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and of course at Locked On Browns YouTube channel, where you can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. So Myles Garrett, as we know, has made a very public trade request. I am anxiously awaiting, as I am on my way to Indy as this episode drops, to hear what Andrew Berry has to say about the situation here on Tuesday, now that he's gone public with it. And, I think the interesting part of this, as this all unfolds in the weeks and months ahead, is how ugly Myles Garrett is willing to make it. Because we know the Browns' stance is right now. Andrew Berry has said he's not trading Myles Garrett. We know that could all just be posturing. We also know here at the Combine this week, that's where things could start picking up. You could start getting teams talking to each other. You could start getting agents talking to each other. And start to get a sense of like what the market, what the price tag is going to be for Myles Garrett, and what would get the Browns to budge on potentially trading for him. So that could all start this week. And as we think through these things, like, I think it's interesting to sort of contemplate how far Myles Garrett's really willing to go to get what he wants, which is get out of Cleveland and go to a contender. He said he would do whatever it takes to do it, to get there. But what does that actually mean? I think is an important question to sort of ask in hearing Myles talk about that. Now, here's my assumptions, and these are just assumptions sitting here today. But I assume that he won't show up for the offseason program. I assume he won't show up for OTAs. I assume he won't show up for veteran minicamp. Training camp is where I think it will get interesting if the Browns truly haven't traded him by that point, because he's guaranteed no money in his contract right now. So the Browns, there's been the conversation about whether or not this is just a leverage play for Myles and a way to get more money and get his contract. But that doesn't seem like it's the case. The Browns have been very clear, like they're willing to pay Myles. They want to pay Myles to keep him here. And so if he doesn't show up to training camp, that's where you start finding him or whatever. But at the same time, like, this is a unique situation, because most of the time when players don't show up to training camp, it's because they're holding out. It's because they want more money. They're trying to use that to their advantage to get a team to give in and eventually give them what they want and give them a new contract. But in this instance, like, this is Myles, if he doesn't show up to training camp, basically saying, yeah, I'm not showing up because I don't want to play for you anymore. Like, I want to go play for a contender. So the fines and all that, like, it is what it is. He kind of has like two reasons then not to show up, because he's like, well, I don't have a new contract, and I don't want to play for you. And so that's what's interesting, is like, if would he sign an extension? Like, if the Browns came to the table and they said, hey, here's what we want to do to get you back on the field, get you to training camp, keep you around here. We're going to make you the highest paid defensive player in the league, 40, maybe 40, upwards of $40 million a year, which would certainly tip the scales and would be warranted for Myles. He's that type of player. Like, would that get him back in the door? Or is he drawing a line in the sand and like, I don't even want to negotiate a contract with you. I don't want to be here. That's the bottom line. I want to go. I don't want the extension from you. I want it from somebody else. And so does that then lead to or necessitate the Browns allowing him to negotiate contract extensions with future teams, and then they figure out which one they're going to trade with. I don't know, but that stuff will all play out obviously in the months ahead. But training camp is the tipping point. Like him not showing up to OTAs and all that, like that feels like a pretty normal place to begin if he really wants out. It's training camp where things will get really, really real. But that's if this even gets to that point. Now, when I talk about making it ugly, though, I think like as much as Myles going on Radio Row and talking about his trade request, talking about why he wants out, being very public with his demands, I think rubs some Browns fans the wrong way. Maybe you were rubbed the wrong way by it, and I understand why. As soon as you mentioned LeBron James in that conversation, I think it turned a lot of people off to Myles doing this in the first place because LeBron just has a negative connotation in this town in general. He left the city twice. He did come back and win a championship, and he deserves the credit for that. I don't hold any ill will towards LeBron for that, but some people are upset that he left the second time and didn't stick around. So I get it. So hearing that Myles talk to him, the guy who's spurned the city twice, I think didn't sit well with some people. I totally get it. I get those reasons. I still think largely, though, people understand where Myles is coming from. Most fans I've sort of interacted with or heard from, they seem to understand, like, yeah, I get why he's doing this. I get why he wants to go to a contender. Browns aren't in that window right now. I can see where he's coming from. So I think there's like a respect level there of, yeah, we get it. It sucks, but we get it from fans. Now, what I will say is that to me is the point of no return that I don't think Myles would go to. If you think back to LeBron in the first time he left, like a decision style announcement where he does it on national TV, almost like breaks up with it with the other person, the partner on live TV, kicks you while you're down. Like that was embarrassing. That was a black guy in LeBron's career for some time. I don't think Myles would do anything like that. I do like, and that's I think where he draws the line in terms of him saying he's willing to do whatever it takes. We see this in I think another example in the NBA is like Damian Lillard. He wanted out of Portland a couple years back, right? And he made that clear, but he wasn't willing to go so far as to like start sabotaging the situation he was currently in, making fans in Portland hate him on the way out. And I think Myles is going to fall into the same boat here. I don't think he's going to do anything that's going to jeopardize his relationship with Cleveland, his relationship with Cleveland fans. He still wants them to recognize him as an all-time great. He still wants this city, which he has called his second home on numerous occasions. He's invested in the community here. He owns the Cleveland. He's a part owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Like he is clearly part of this culture, this area. He doesn't want to leave with any ill will. He just wants to go chase championships, which again is why people can understand that. So I don't think where Myles, I think, draws the line, as he says he'll do whatever it takes, is I think it stops short of, throwing shade at Cleveland, throwing shade at the fans, doing something of that extreme that would then tarnish his relationship with the city. And he's been very political about that. He hasn't done that to this point, but I do think that's where he draws the line. Not showing up to OTAs, not showing up to practices, that stuff is all sort of commonplace in the NFL. And that's the type of stuff that usually necessitates either a deal getting done to bring you back to the table or, actually delivering on the promise to get somebody out of town. But yeah, I think when we say he can make it ugly, or we try to theorize how ugly he would make it, there's things that he can do. There's levers he can pull, but I don't see him going as far as doing something that would tarnish the way he's viewed in Cleveland or the legacy he leaves in Cleveland as a Cleveland Brown, if he were to get traded as he's hoping for. Speaking of getting out of town, the Browns made their first moves of the offseason, including a unsurprising one in the release of Juan Thornhill. What does it mean from a salary cap standpoint? What does it mean for Myles Garrett as well? Because we'll talk, there is a tie into this. And what are the other moves that were made? We'll talk about all of those things when we get back right here on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, so as the combine gets rolling, the Browns roster moves also get rolling, and I think one of the least surprising moves that was bound to happen this offseason went down on Monday when the team officially released Juan Thornhill. I guess they didn't officially do it because they didn't announce it themselves, but there was all sorts of reporting, people that I got, we got, I think reporters in the biz, myself included, got confirmation that Juan Thornhill was going to be released. And the key part of this is that Thornhill is going to be a post June 1 designated cut. So there's cap implications that come into play with that designation specifically. And there's also a Myles Garrett tie in here that I think is worth talking about and worth noting as well in relation to that. So first, let's talk about what it means for Juan Thornhill. Juan Thornhill is basically on the books right now. He'll stay on the books, even though he'll be able to sign with another team come the start of the new league year. He will stay on the books for, I think, like $5 million that he was owed this year until June 1st. And then on June 1st, he officially gets, shows up as a release. And that's where his dead cap figure, his dead cap money gets accelerated into the salary cap. Now, because you made him a June 1st designation, the Browns will be able to spread that figure out. I think it's upwards of like $12 million over next season and the season after that. That's the key component here. It's like you do this because you're trying to move on from a player, but you don't want to eat all that money right now. So it's designating him as a post June 1st cut allows you to spread that dead cap hit. It eases the burden of the dead cap hit over 2 seasons rather than just the one, and you got to pay it all up front right now. So that's the key part of this as to why they did that. It does say it will eventually save the Browns $2.5 million or around there. But again, that money won't show up for the Browns to use until summertime, until after June 1st. So that's the key from the finances of it that you're going to want to know and sort of understand about why, about the what that means for Juan Thornhill. Now, the reason this ties into Myles Garrett, as we just talked about his trade request, is because teams are only allowed to use the post June 1st designation for 2 moves every year. And that can be a trade or that can be a release or a cut, like releasing somebody or cutting somebody. And so they've used one on Juan Thornhill. The second one could be Myles Garrett if you were to trade him and make him a post June 1st trade. And honestly, for the same reasons we talk about with Juan Thornhill's dead cap money and why they made him a post June 1st designation, it's the same thing applies to Myles Garrett. He has an even larger $36 million, I think it's upwards of, dead cap hit if you move on from him or you trade him that the Browns would have to eat. So making him a post June 1st trade would allow you to spread that $36 million over 2 seasons rather than just the one. And so that's notable from a salary cap standpoint that the Browns, have a little extra flexibility if they do it that way. The difference is though, well, like on February 24th, like they did, they can cut Juan Thornhill and designate him a post June 1st release, and no one's the wiser. It's all good. Trades are different though. There's too much logistical stuff that goes into those to allow teams to trade somebody in February and say, well, this is a post June 1st trade. Any trade that's a post June 1st trade has to go down post June 1st. It has to go down after June 1st. So if they're saving that second usage of the post June 1st designation for Myles Garrett, we won't know until June. But what's interesting is like you might get an idea if they are trying to do that based on if they make anybody else a post June 1st cut, because there are some other players on this roster that they could part ways with, move on from, and designate as post June 1st cuts that would allow them to do the same thing they did with Juan Thornhill, get some cap relief, but maybe there's a dead cap figure involved that they would have to eat. And so they want to spread it out over a couple of years. But if they don't do that with anybody else, it might be a sign that they're saving that second June 1st designation for Myles if they end up trading him at some point this offseason. So just something to keep an eye on, just something to think about. There were a couple other moves made, which I'll get to, but I do think just to sort of put the bow on the Juan Thornhill part of this, I don't think anybody was surprised by this. I'm assuming you weren't surprised by this when you got the notification on your phone, because the Juan Thornhill experience was a roller coaster ride, man. He showed up. He was excited. He was boisterous about the potential of the team. And I think fans are unfair to him for that. Like, I think it's okay for a player to show up even to a losing organization that hadn't had a lot of success to that point and feel like he was going to help turn the tide and have confidence in that. I didn't have a problem with that, but some fans did. And so I think they got off on the wrong foot anyway. But then the calf injuries the last 2 years, he only played 11 games each of the last 2 seasons, which is a lot, but it was just a problem. It was too much. And that, fans started calling him unavailable. And then it was made worse by some of his effort at times in games not being there. And most notably, I think the Saints game comes to mind, the Marquez Valdez-Scantling touchdown where he didn't chase after him and he owned it. I mean, I'll give him credit. He said, like, that wasn't me. I needed to be better there. And so he deserves some credit for that. But still, like, you can't put that on tape. And the second you did, fans are gonna ridicule you. And so that's what happened. So I think fans are ready to move on from Juan. I think Juan was probably ready to move on from the Browns, and clearly the Browns are ready to move on from Juan. And it's just it's another Andrew Berry signing that just didn't work out at that position specifically. He has swung and missed twice at trying to get free agent safeties to come in and like solidify the back end of the defense. And so it becomes another need now that the Browns are going to have to sort of think about and potentially address this offseason. Although I will say, could see them addressing it in-house with somebody already on the roster. But that's a conversation for another day. Real quick, the other moves that were made on Monday included parting ways with long snapper Charlie Hewlett. That's pretty notable because he's been on the team since 2014. He's played in 152 games, but I'm assuming they saved like a little over $1 million from this. Every bit counts. Every bit counts, right, guys? You got to get every little ounce of money that you can to have the flexibility to make some moves in free agency. So you'll take the extra $1 million. But Rex Sunahara sort of emerged last year with Hewlett hurt, as you know, he was doing a fine job. And I think they probably feel like, we're better off paying less money for this position than we're paying Hewlett. And so as much as we like Hewlett and he's good, time to move on, save the money. They're penny pinching in a way at this point, but they're looking for any way to sort of save money. But that's the situation they're in. So he's gone. And the Browns also did sign cornerback Anthony Kendall, who has a kind of cool local connection. He is a Baldwin Wallace guy. So same town the Browns headquarters in Berea. He played right down the road. And so it's kind of a cool feel-good story for a player to get a chance with a team that wasn't too far from where he went to school. So gotta like that one. But this is just the beginning. As I said, Combine Week, I said it on Monday's show, chance for, maybe some restructures to go down, even more cap flexibility to sort of happen here and emerge here for the Browns and Andrew Berry. So we'll see if any of that stuff comes to fruition in the coming days from Indy. Speaking of the Combine, two potential Browns targets, Shedeur Sanders and Abdul Carter, are skipping workouts at the Combine. It's really not that big of a deal. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, as the Combine gets rolling this week, big notable news on the front of two players that the Browns could be interested in at number 2 overall. Shedeur Sanders is one of them, quarterback out of Colorado, and the other, Abdul Carter, defensive end out of Penn State. Both will not be participating in the on-field stuff at the Combine. Shedeur Sanders said over the weekend, I know Ian Rappaport, I think, shared it, that he's going to skip throwing and participate more so in like the interviews and focus on that portion of the Combine, which frankly is the most important part of the Combine for these guys. And we'll talk about that more here in a second. Abdul Carter's situation is different. Shedeur is just kind of choosing, I don't want to do this. Carter, it sounds like the shoulder injury that he sustained. You might remember he sustained a shoulder injury during the College Football Playoff, and it lingered through to the next game against Notre Dame. Hindered him a little bit, but he still was really effective, which I think was the impressive thing was, as you put something like that out on tape that, hey, I had the shoulder issue. I still played through it. And I still played at a really high level. So that was big. But yeah, like I like his makes sense. The medical stuff, you got to take care of that. It has to be a priority. And the biggest thing for him is that, if the Browns were to take him at 2, there aren't any concerns from his camp that it would hinder his ability to be ready for the start of the season. So that's the biggest thing. You don't want that to be something that lingers or impacts him suiting up for you day one of the season. So that's where, that kind of comes into play for the Browns. If they were to take him, they will avoid that biggest concern, if you will. And he should be ready to go. Now on the flip side, like I said, with Shedeur, he is just choosing not to throw. And I think it's funny, like people will make a bigger deal out of this than they should. I hope we get to a point where this is just like normalcy or like normalized, where we don't care that these guys don't throw at the Combine, because it's really not the end of the world. And honestly, like somebody like Shedeur, he has more to lose than gain from throwing at the Combine. If he's throwing to guys and receivers are dropping passes or he's just not in sync with them, like that could hurt his stock more than help it. And so it's sharing that he's going to throw at the pro day instead, I think is notable and important, because like that's where it's a controlled environment for him. He gets a chance to sort of go out and throw to guys he knows and do the, be in an environment that he's comfortable in and still sort of showcase what he can do. But that's been more of a common practice anyway, is guys kind of taking the advantage to throw at that event rather than the combine. And there's some guys who have to throw at the combine because they're trying to help their stock out. Like some of these guys, it feels more, it's done out of a necessity more than somebody like Shedeur Sanders, who, I mean, people know what they know about Shedeur Sanders at this point. He's being talked about as one of the top quarterbacks in this class. He has a chance to go top two, maybe like top two, top three. Like he's in that conversation already. He doesn't have to throw at the combine to like help himself out anymore. He's already in that conversation. So who really cares? It doesn't mean he doesn't care. It doesn't mean he's lazy, whatever. And the other part of this too is like, he's not the first guy to do this. There are countless examples of guys who didn't throw at the combine. Joe Burrow was one. Bryce Young from a couple of years ago was one. I think Robert Griffin III was one. He didn't throw at the combine a couple of years ago. And there's some others that I'm drawing a blank on right now. Andrew Luck, maybe. Kyler Murray was one. So yeah, I don't want to miss anybody or say any wrong names, but you get the point. There's some bigger names, some higher profile quarterbacks that didn't throw at the combine. And yeah, things worked out just fine for them. So this is not the end of the world. It should not be held against him. And focusing on the interviews is one of the most important parts of this event. And that's why I said, of everything that goes on at Combine Week, the conversations with teams, the meetings that you have like in your sort of team settings with players individually end up being the most important things that come out of this, more so than any of the on the field stuff. I kind of joke that the combine workout portion is kind of just the underwear Olympics, just a bunch of guys running around in spandex doing these goofy tests that sort of indicate how athletic they are and then what they're going to do at the next level, but really don't paint the perfect picture of that. And I think that's the important thing here. As we have these conversations and you think about the combine and you think about like what we should take away from this week in general, guys, like the tape is always the most important. No matter what happens at the combine this week, just remember that the tape matters most of all. That's the bottom line. What these guys have put on tape, what these guys have shown on the field when the bullets are flying and they're suiting up out there under the lights for their respective teams, that's the thing that's going to get you drafted more so than what you do at the combine. I understand there's instances where a guy runs a 4.3 and it increases his stock and everybody is in love with the guy and they're like, man, I need a fast player like that. I get that, but the tape is still the tape to me is still gospel. The combine is extra context, but the tape is gospel. That's the thing that's going to sell you to teams. That's the thing that's going to get you a job. And that's the thing that teams are primarily going to look at. So just keep that in mind as you watch this stuff unfold over the weekend. But yeah, not a big deal that either of these guys aren't participating. And it certainly should not hinder the Browns from taking either one of them. I'm sure Shedeur is going to be great when he sets his pro day and throws at it. And I'm sure the Browns will be in attendance to see it. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. More to come this week from Indianapolis. That's right. I will be in Indy to break down more of what we get from the Cleveland Browns, Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, some of the players who meet with the Browns. We'll have you covered right here at Locked On Browns. So make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already to make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every day. For your second listen, go find the new Locked On NFL show or our NFL Squad show, or you can keep it local by checking out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. Peace.